Welcome to Changing the Game Transformation Accelerated webcast, where we share for 45 minutes or so some insights with some industry leaders to unlock those insights and accelerate success. I'm Graham Christie. I'm co-author of Changing the Game, the Playbook for Leading Business Transformation, which has been published through Wiley and available in online and retail bookstores wherever you are. Or you could go to CTG Playbook, if I get that right, CTG Playbook for more information on the book and the executive online short course for individuals and teams. And today I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined with Marcella Larsen, who many of the viewers of the webcast will know. Marcy has a significant profile in the local landscape and is a go-to leader on the subjects we're about to talk about. And Marcella, welcome. Happy New Year. And I thought I might just hand over to you to maybe just give those who don't know you a little bit of a background about where you come from.
Thanks, Graham. And firstly, it's just great to have an invitation to be a part of changing the game and touching on topics like transformation, because it's so critical now and I guess will be forever. But a bit about myself, and I've had some big changes recently, just this week, so great timing here. But I've spent a bulk of my career here in Australia deeply focused on the retail and consumer goods industry, building on my technology background from a career at Microsoft. And I was reflecting on that more recently, and what brought me to Microsoft quite a few decades ago was truly supply chain, and coming out of a traineeship in Korea at the time. So I'm kind of back to where I started, infused with technology, but I had a deep curiosity for SaaS and getting closer to the business process, which has led me to land at Salesforce as the senior director for retail in ANZ. But what I'm most excited about the new role is continuing to work with customers, but being in a position to truly shape the product and solutions and the roadmap based on customer feedback. So being in these markets, but working on a global team. So I'm very excited about that.
Fantastic. Salesforce very happy and very lucky, I think, to have you on board. And congratulations with the new appointment, and good luck with everything.
Yes, well, it's always good to be steep on the learning curve, and I've gotten that on day 3.
That's right, vertical. So look, I mean, I think that this is such a pivotal time, isn't it? And we've talked about this before, such a pivotal time in so many industries, and where technology intersects and the transformation that often needs to come out of that. But I thought we might start just with a bit of a scene setter question, which is pertinent to the days we're living in just now around the pandemic. You know, at a high level, how do you think the pandemic has and perhaps will reshape consumer goods and sort of retail models and that whole sort of the whole engagement that customers have with brands and products?
Right. Well, I think one thing we all know with certainty is we can't look to the patterns of the past any longer. So the skills and the mindset of everyone in the executive ranks and throughout the organization really are dependent on thinking differently and being prepared for ongoing change. And I assume that's the case across many industries. But in retail and consumer goods, we're touching the lives of our citizens every day. And I think it's very personal to everyone, and we can relate to our own experiences. And I know in the lead up to Christmas, Graham, you and many listeners today probably shopped early. And so really one of the first seasons ever, we didn't see this race to the bottom in the industry, which was pretty exciting because many retailers did not need to give up their margin. But that being said, other large retailers like Woolworths has been publicly speaking about the fact they are losing some of their margin because they want to maintain that close relationship and trust with their customers. So that's been interesting to watch, to play out. And now we're getting into a new era. We're past the Christmas season. And I think we're seeing the impact of supply chain start to touch our markets much more severely than it did in the last year. So a lot of the signals we saw coming out of the US US, we're starting to see here. We're starting to see shortages on some of the shelves, and we're starting to switch what we purchase. And those habits we developed during the past 2 years have become locked in effectively. Things like more cooking from home, and our lives have changed significantly. So I think in some ways that's quite positive. And I believe that the leaders are really looking more to data to better understand the customer, and more in what I would say more micro slices of data too. So we can't look back to those patterns of the past. We need to look at how are things changing very quickly and think about that risk and volatility moving forward. And we have just some immediate impact, of course, from the supply chain and what's being more severely affected, that everyone's dealing with in different ways. But I'm seeing a lot of creativity, and I'm seeing a lot of brands become great at things like last mile, click and collect. They didn't even have that capability maybe 15 months or 2 years ago. So it's amazing to see that resilience playing out, and will continue to do so. But now they have more confidence they can make these changes quickly.
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses have been surprised about how agile they've had to become. And, there's been a general acceleration, hasn't there, of what may have taken 3 to 5 years to actually be forced to happen in under two. I was reading some report from overnight around grocery in the UK, and that Sainsbury's, on a grocery angle, have jumped from 10% of their sales volume being online to 17% in the last 12 months, and they're viewed as leading that sort of sector in the UK. And I think yesterday JB Hi-Fi reported again pretty buoyant results. But it sounds like you think that even outside of those brands and propositions which would be considered, I guess, for nesting and enjoying the nesting boom because we've all been at home, you feel that there's been a broader positive impact at having to accelerate the adoption of new technologies and new ways of working, just because it affects every single industry?
Definitely. I think one of the biggest challenges that LISA has had is access to labor and skilled labor, and a lot of thought around how automation can drive a positive impact. So it's less of this negative because we are dealing with less availability of the workforce. And especially in Australia, because we've had our borders closed for the last effectively 2 years, and they're starting to slowly open up. But I think we're going to continue to see labor shortages as we move into the next year for sure.
And so that obviously means that lots of businesses will be, talent shortage, inbound labor issues. That obviously means that businesses are looking at their own their workforce, the current workforce, and needing to optimize, upskill, reorganize that workforce. All of those things put together, you think there'll be a greater onus on that?
Yeah, and also the knock-on effect in terms of skilling the workforce you have, and micro-credentialing. So if we think about the technology teams, for instance, I used to work closely with, they're looking at non-traditional sources within their own companies. Maybe people working in the retail store that have an interest in technology, but they hadn't pursued a university degree. Well, they can be accelerated through many different programs for micro-credentials to bring them into the digital team. So it's quite an exciting time for ambitious folks that are thinking differently. And we know, I think there's a tremendous stat out there around technology in terms of the shortfall we're going to see by 2025. I think there's something like 660,000 technology career professionals in Australia will need something like over 2 million by 2025. So that's not going to come through traditional education at all, or immigration.
It would be remiss of me not to remind everybody that Changing the Game has a fantastic 6-week online course in business transformation. And the reason that we developed that course is because we believe really fervently that if you're in business, you're in the business of transformation, and it doesn't really matter where you are in an organization, that the ability to help shape, reshape, retool the business that's around you is going to be a critical factor in where you can develop an edge. So that's one of the reasons that the course exists. But I couldn't agree more. Those micro credentialing and those almost short courses where executives and leaders can download the knowledge and practical frameworks that they need right now, rather than spend lots of money and lots of time on more traditional orthodox academic endeavors, is definitely seems to be the way that the market is moving.
And as you know, Graham, oftentimes when you get the executives together in one of these courses and you actually get their time, a lot of the magic happens because they've been working potentially in silos and they're able to learn together and find that shared meaning and sense of purpose. So it has another great effect too, because I think we all find it quite difficult to get out of our day to day, but that's the magic sometimes I see happen in these specific learning opportunities within an organization.
Yeah. I wanted to just go back to one of the things you mentioned earlier on, which is around, the impacts and disruption in the supply chain. And I'm sort of interested to hear from you about what sort of changes you've observed over the last, I guess specifically a couple of years, but perhaps slightly longer, in terms of the mindset of larger businesses and the way that they're looking at supply, trying to streamline their supply chain, trying to strip costs out of trying to optimize further. What sort of things have you been seeing a bit more of?
Yeah. Well, there's certainly been an evolution, I think, a couple of years ago, and we'll continue to always have that focus on the customer and the customer experience. So a lot of thought about the store experience, the online experience, and the realization with an out of stock that doesn't drive an incredible customer experience at all. Loyalty can be won or lost. But the supply chain in some ways was very back office. It didn't have much of a feature on innovation and being front and center. And the tables then turned entirely, because I think those that have had diversified suppliers have managed to have resilient supply chains and wring out the costs while delivering great satisfaction are the winners today. And thought through, am I going to source from stores? Am I going to have a central distribution? Will it be blended? And really thought through that. And so I saw the supply chain move from the back office really to front and center to the front office, and data playing a huge role in that as well. And I think we're going to continue to see the supply chain professionals elevate and work closer with the CMO and the CDO and the CFO. So it's quite an exciting time for that profession. And also new partnerships. So if you can't build that skill or don't have that capability, some very interesting things are happening. What I'm hearing rumblings of in the US play out is supply chain almost as a utility. So why is there this redundancy where Walmart and Home Depot and everyone else have to have their own fleet and trucks or compete for that shipping container? So how can the industry itself work closer together? And ideally, we may see some of that play out here in Australia as well. We have one of the highest costs for logistics and delivery, since we're such a huge nation. And we don't have the urban density, like the UK example you mentioned with Sainsbury. We've got much more density there. So oftentimes the retailer is taking on those costs to better serve the nation. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting developments in that space and partnerships moving forward and embracing technology to figure out better models.
And I'd have interest again from your experience. Is something like a supply chain transformation, is that something that could be chunked down into sensible phases, or do you need to sort of eat the elephant all at once? I mean, how big an onerous a task is that, or can you chew off little bits here and there?
Well, I mean, I think starting with some of the basics and understanding more about your customer, getting better at anticipating demand in uncertain times, taking more micro slices of the data, and then starting to attack your suppliers, thinking about them. Do you have diversification within your suppliers so that you can have that resilience? Those are some good starting points. Then maybe to think about interesting partnerships. Potentially a big one where I see the opportunity for a lot of cost reduction is this: can I source better from stores? Do I need a central distribution center? How can I better blend that? And that can have some immediate impact, because it turns out a lot of customers, they're quite willing to do click and collect and go and pick that up. They don't always need last mile to their home. So if you can meet the customer halfway, in a sense, it's a win-win for both parties.
Yes, and I'm supposing that there always can be, and maybe always should be, a desire and an appetite to test and experiment outside of the main business with new operating models and some of those partnerships. So to hive off a particular geographic footprint, or perhaps maybe it's a segment of product, and just be adopting more of an innovation agenda to try and see what is scalable.
And pushing some of your partners that you may view as non-traditional. But one thing that I'm seeing play out, lots of conversations, I haven't seen anything big happen yet, but we may all know about the rise of the super app in China, which effectively provides a number of services when you choose to shop, and some benefits for the brands that go into the super app. So what I'm hearing rumblings of here is more like the payment providers that need to add more value beyond just taking a percentage of the transaction. Potentially, if you're banking with a certain bank or using those services, maybe they'll be providing last mile services for the brands within them, launching a super app, and you could be part of that marketplace with the other services. So I think it's important to stay on these trends, so you can think about those partnerships as opposed to having to build it yourself.
Yeah, that's right. And the I guess the area around last mile fulfillment is, in particularly in Australia, has obviously been one of those sectors that have just blossomed, because necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? And are you seeing really good examples, or world-class examples of that sort of business and service taking off here?
Well, I think the startups are doing some of the most interesting things here. You talked about JB Hi-Fi earlier, and I think some of their growth is they're meeting the customers where they want. So they've done a great job with store pickup and last mile, and they approached really with a great partnership. So they work with a startup called Redero, and recognizing when you work with these startups, it gives you some power with the approach. So you're not just simply giving your customer experience to Australia Post or TNT. You're keeping that customer data, and you're able to look at that customer experience, measure the different providers, and the customer gets a great experience in understanding more about the delivery when their product's going to arrive. So there's kind of a rise of new providers in this space. Quite different than if you're deciding to go with Uber or just outsource and have a partnership. So I think JB's done a really good job of recognizing that as an Australian retailer. Woolworths has done some similar things. They made some investments in some of these, and even with 7-Eleven, they made an acquisition of Tipple because they recognized how important last mile was going to be to the diversification of their business model. So it's a very interesting space at the moment.
Yeah. And on you mentioned consumer data, and obviously you've been right in the middle of a lot of that maturing of customer data and how it's managed, how it's handled, how it's made sense of through those more recent years in Microsoft. Where do you think larger companies into enterprise level businesses, where do you think they're sitting on their journey of customer data and what to do with it? Because although I'm sure no two companies are the same, there'll be some common themes. And what sort of life stage do you think those sorts of businesses are at?
Well, I think that firstly, I like to say if data was a product, insights suffers from bad branding with the word data.
Right. Yeah.
So I think most of the larger organizations recognize how important that is. But the fact remains that they have legacy systems and it's disconnected. So some of the biggest challenges that I've seen is kind of connecting that customer data with the operational data to truly bring better insights to bear. Even within an organization, I kind of noticed a bit of a lack of understanding sometime of how operational data can be viewed more in real time through concepts more like a data lake. And then there's a different concept for that customer data platform where you can take your customer data and you can also bring in some other external sources to understand more about the customer outside of when they're shopping with you. But bring the two together is really the holy grail. And I think that's what they're all sort of trying to work through now, but it's unlocking a lot of the data that's already in their organization. And then what route are they going to take to do that, to make that easy? So gone are the days when someone was cleaning up all of the data for prep and load and trying to make some sense of it through industry data models, effectively building their own. And it's become a lot easier. But again, it kind of goes back to a lack of awareness or even confusion within the marketplace of what path am I going to go down to do this?
Yes, it's sort of always. It goes back to a point you made earlier, which is it's forcing functions within a business to work far more closely than they ever have.
Yeah.
And people that would normally really deeply work together on outcomes to do so. And do you think that requires really an executive to have far higher degrees and far broader territories than they may have in the past, just to have a greater appreciation for their colleagues' expertise?
Like definitely more partnerships. So what I saw happening in the technology world, where a lot of organizations were putting people from the technology team, embedding them in the business. And then those goals of their business partners became very real. And then the ultimate driver for these changes is usually the CEO, kind of recognizing how important that was to their transformation. So I thought that was a great way to really have technology become more of an enabler for the impact and less lip service, because the KPIs of more of a siloed technology team could look quite different than when you start to embed key individuals within the business.
Yes, it's sort of our experience researching in the book, for instance, was interesting in that facet in terms of um, functions breaking out of their territory, particularly finance would be one, breaking out of their territory because technology decisions and multi-layered transformation programs, always carry quite a hefty price tag, and therefore there's a lot of interest from finance. So finance becoming more literate in the contributions of functions such as the technology group or the marketing group, because of these large ticket expensive ticket items that are being evaluated. And so the more progressive individuals are the ones that really want to sort of absorb that and have a big appetite for understanding that. And we'll see a lot more of that type of executive, I think.
Absolutely. And I'll give an example here where the CFO and the technology team working in concert can make better strategic decisions for their future and the foundational investments. But if we take an organization that might be looking at a solution that still needs a lot of customization for their industry, when they were truly maybe more in a position that they needed to accelerate and go fast, they may evaluate simply on pricing that's presented to them, not thinking about the pitfalls down the road of building out connectors or certain features don't exist. So it's only through that partnership, potentially with the CFO, the business, and the technology, that they can build out a better sense of what path is going to be best for them. So you might have the business owner who wants immediate gratification. You've got IT that's thinking much more about the security and other elements. But I think the CFO can really help build out those models to build in all the considerations with input from both the business and IT.
Yeah, yeah,
Business may not be thinking about the fact that okay, this product I'm looking at off the shelf actually doesn't have enough to support our own process flows. And I don't know how much it's going to cost me to build out new connectors and what we need. And they need help from the IT team to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And talking of, I suppose, teams, whether that's at a senior leadership team or another area of the business, you've had a lot of experience of entering into that environment as a technology partner. I'd be interested to understand where you see teams working well together, or where you see goals being met in a really successful, ongoing successful fashion. What sort of traits do those teams have? And that could be at the start of a change or transformation exercise, or it could be, I guess, trying to reboot something that's stalled. I'm interested in your observations on, when it works, why does it work with particular teams?
Well, number one, I think, is that leadership vision and support. So that's absolutely required to support the agenda of ongoing transformation, number one, to empower the learning and experimentation that it may take to get to the right solutions and roadmap and plan. And that's especially tough in an industry like retail that's very execution focused. So it's only through that leadership support that the rest of the organization is going to be more comfortable to take chances. And that encouragement to work together, the recognition of the importance of skilling and being able to provide that with ease within the organization, because our work is changing, daily, and effectively making it easy for the employees within the organization to consume that is definitely a big one. And I think those that look at non-traditional partnerships have great potential to succeed well. And I see that happening within conglomerates here, where they may at sometimes compete against each other, like Wesfarmers, but I think there's a great spirit of learning as well. And then there's more thought around, well, what data can we share to better understand what's happening? And then this drive to work with partnerships in new ways. So they might be the technology vendor or the financial services provider, like I said, like kind of pushing them to provide more services so they can focus on what they do well. I think of companies like Starbucks and how they've had to evolve in the US, and they've worked through a lot of partnerships with what would have been their vendors in the past to excel and continue to grow and better reflect the values of their customer. I think those are certainly all traits, and recognizing key trends and being experimental with the technology, but not just leaving the technology in the lab. So one thing that always concerns me is if I visit a customer and they have an innovation lab and there's no windows, and you've got like engineering teams in there just testing things out. It's a pretty good sense that they're not testing those in a store. They're not working with the rest of the organization. And there's little communication about any innovation that they're finding there. So, innovation should happen every day in each part of the organization. And they need to constantly be thinking about, how do we scale that in? How do we up-level everyone? Those are
Absolutely right.
things.
Yeah, I mean, satellites are satellites, right? So if satellites, we hope, don't let it crash to Earth, whereas we want all innovation to be right in the middle of the organization, not out to one side. Absolutely. I mean, I think you mentioned, and I couldn't agree more, that top levels, ideally CEO mandate, that's from day one, all the way through. I'm assuming transformation doesn't really end. So it's having a very proactive, very embedded CEO that is seen to be and acting as a real the real catalyst for change is important. And in fact, in the book and in the course, we go to quite reasonable lengths around understanding those areas of creating the mandate and mapping the journey before anything is really any tool is picked up. And that creating the mandate needs to come from the very top and then be infused through, I think, doesn't it? And then mapping the journey in terms of, well, actually, what is the aspiration? How realistic is that? Are we seeing this business in very authentic, real terms, or are we regurgitating our internal myths about our business and our marketplace? Because that's often a trap to fall into. And that has to be led with a very firm grasp from the very top and seen all the way through. And that takes energy, doesn't it? I mean, it takes resilience and energy from the top, and a real mechanism to maintain that, because these are not 1 or 2 week exercises. These are in some cases multi-year. Do you sort of see by now? I suspect you're used to seeing the signs of decay or the signs of stagnation, and maybe able to jump in and help out. Do you see those sorts of life stages play out in multi-year programs?
Well, I think multi-year programs may be reevaluated. And I would add to the observation that maybe stagnation can become a risk if the board is not very active as well. So the CEO to be empowered with the transformation agenda, but a curious board who wants to continue to push the organization to avoid stagnation. So some of the highlights in the past few years come from some of the boards that I've worked with. One of the most impressive really was 7-Eleven, which is a privately held company, but they are very curious and continue to want to learn themselves and recognize how important that is. So I think that is absolutely critical as well.
Do you think so? They would be. I mean, and that's even from a consumer point of view, you can see that they're very curious around adoption of technology and very customer first in their approach. They would be a standout. I'm guessing they certainly are from your experience.
Yeah.
And how would you characterize Australian boards generally around this area? You think if it was a school report card, would it say excellent performer year in year out, or could do better, or something between the two?
I think there's a recognition that boards need to look at are they reflecting the customers they serve and the organization they want to build? There's more of a curiosity in reaching out for non-traditional education within the ranks of the board. Graham, you might know some of the latest numbers. I don't know if boards today are truly reflecting diversity. I get this. There's much more interest in that, and we have a long way to go. But they're embracing the new values that have many definitions, like sustainability. Where do they go for education there? How do they deem what's the most important when there are so many definitions? So I think we're in a tremendous time of change. I think Australia's in a great position, though. When I speak to my peers globally, sometimes they're not even discussing boards. I feel like board of director and that connection is quite deep in Australia. So maybe we have some great opportunity to show best practice in the world here. I think it's undergoing deep change right now. And I think we're seeing a lot of good changes, positive changes within boards of companies here in Australia, certainly in my industry.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some moves afoot, I think, that we've seen around trying to address some of the gaps essentially in boards, and that might extend beyond what type of board appointments are being shaped into areas such as specialist advisory teams advising the board. So if the board recognizes it's relatively light on digital expertise or business transformation expertise, that it's not about putting people into those positions on the full board, but actually creating a layer where there are advisory groups that are advising that board on a regular basis to try and migrate that group in total into the right sort of space. So there are some different ways I think that that's being addressed, which is really positive. I just wanted to remain in a sort of positive, optimistic mode and ask you where you feel there are other really good tailwinds that will hopefully help shape the Australian and New Zealand marketplace. That having gone through the pandemic, where are the other positives you think that we could look to?
Well, I think even just on our exports and kind of the loss of some of the opportunity we had in China, that resilience we've had with new markets like the UK, with wine industry, for example. So being pushed in new directions for growth, and being proud of the products and the transparency in the story that we have to share. So as we see the consumer preference for more sustainable consumption and products, we have some very unique offerings here in Australia. We have transparency with a number of our retailers to really look back into the supply chain and know that they were ethically produced. So that could give us some interesting opportunities within the market. I think we have a ways to go to catch up with Europe there, but potentially that could be a positive differentiator for us. And I think there's a recognition that business models are continuing to evolve. So I'm seeing a lot of retailers and consumer goods organizations kind of morph into each other, where consumer goods companies are looking a lot more like retailers, and then marketplaces becoming a big thing. So if you're a retailer, your business model innovation may be to offer endless aisle and range. So you're developing more of a marketplace. And I think it's a race to the super app, as I said. Will that come from financial services? Will one of our leading retailers delve into that space? A lot of interesting opportunities still to come.
And do you think the sort of direct to consumer segment is I mean, it feels like it's very much in its infancy in Australia and New Zealand compared to other parts of the world. Do you think that proportionally will take on the sort of volume and momentum that it has elsewhere?
Well, if the leadership is staying on top of the early trends in this area, which undoubtedly they are, because I think Australia looks outward, what we've seen over the past couple of years is in the US, for example, direct to consumer was all the rage, and many startups were direct to consumer. But the cost and digital became crowded. So we're seeing more of the direct to consumers have to become part of maybe a marketplace. Some of the initial excitement is sputtering out. So I think we can learn from that. And most of the conversations I've been having, that's very well thought through, and they don't want to degrade their retail channel partners. So I think it's more that they're looking at maybe we become a platform provider or a super app to better help our channel providers. So we're not degrading them, but then we understand more and we're getting more of the data. So if we think of something like sports, for example, and there's a lot of, I guess, suppliers and small clubs and so forth that key brands that service that area of sport, they could be developing a platform that offers things like last mile or even point of sale. But then they're going to get a lot of rich data around the consumers in Australia. So I think we're going to see a lot of evolution of who's going to become a platform provider in this next year. And that's why technology becomes quite important as well.
Yeah, a great point. I'm mindful of time, and we try to keep it to 45 minutes as best we can. But obviously, I'd love to hear if you've got really interesting or good examples that you haven't already mentioned from overseas that folks can take away and research in any of the range of topics that we've talked about today. Where are the real standout examples of businesses doing exciting stuff around supply chain, around consumer data, and around these sorts of change and transformation spaces?
Well, I speak to Starbucks a lot because I'm from Seattle. And I think that part of the world has always been somewhat pioneering in sustainability before it was so front and center. So I think Starbucks has done a tremendous job with supply chain in many facets, but being able to look within the supply chain and understand that that coffee that they're sourcing is sourced from an ethically treated, fair trade, and being able to give that insight back to the consumer um, ahead of trend. So knowing that was going to become important, a great use case for blockchain, but then the side benefits of truly being able to have that end-to-end visibility, to be able to forecast and identify when blockages and hits to the supply chain would come. How do we have that resilience to source from elsewhere? And then even that knock-on effect when they went into lockdown of understanding the impact of closing down stores, where to go drive-through only, what to bring on quickly. And then with the labor shortages, I think they've done a pretty good job of also understanding, okay, we're going to have to go with a drive-through model because now we just don't have the labor. It's not a danger, it's a labor. So they've had very good resilience from source into the consumer and even that store experience end to end. So they're a great example.
Yeah, good example.
And just even in the marketing, I've seen some interesting things happen in the US with training the consumer to buy early before Christmas. And now kind of coming back with the transparency about supply chain, but simple things like if your customer is doing a search, what you present to them, it really needs to be in stock if you know it's not going to become in stock later because they'll switch to another provider. So we saw a lot of that happening in the US. It may have been happening here more stealth, but I think that got them through the Christmas season with a lot of learning.
Yeah, yeah. It would have been nice to have a lot of that intelligence in Australian businesses. Certainly, my personal experience is going to a checkout only to find that something wasn't in stock, which is a really bad customer experience, isn't it? So that's an area for growth.
Yeah, and that's always a hard one when you kind of underpin the technology to know what's in stock in real time is tough at that item level. But the good news is there's technology commoditizing that and making it easier. Anyone who has been in this area remembers the promise of RFID, which is what was really needed to be, as you described, item level specific, so you know what's in the shelf at any given time. And the cost of that proved to be elusive for mainstream adoption, although that's changing. But now with technologies like computer vision, cameras in store, the costs have gone down so much that there can be a lot of accuracy just looking at those shelves and telling the system what is in there. So the consumer knows if they're going to take the time to come into the store, they want to make sure the product's there. They also want to learn about the product. The reasons we come in the stores today are very different when we can shop at home.
Couldn't agree more. Just lastly, how can folks, what sort of things you subscribe to, read? What are your resources of information and knowledge that are publicly available and others listening on the webcast could tap into?
Great. Well, I will certainly become a consumer of changing the game. And would love to hear from you, but I guess I pepper up what I listen to. A lot of what I listen to tends to be somewhat US centric because I want to understand that intersection of technology and industry. And I find some of the best insights do come from the US. It's not always industry specific, but I'm a huge fan of Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher.
Yeah.
And I guess they shape a lot of my thinking.
Smart and entertaining.
Yeah. And then they bring a lot of the tech into what's happening. So
Yeah.
I always get, and of course, Scott's got a point of view on Amazon. So it's a great one to follow.
Yeah.
I'm an avid podcast listener. So even like things like Land of the Giants, Vox Media, I find great. But then I I love AFR, and quite frankly, I follow a lot of the publications here, but AFR is just great for bringing together that inspiration from other industries as well, and then kind of looking at what startups do we have coming out here. But the Australian Retail Association has just launched, I think only around 18 months ago, more for the larger retailers. And then Paul Zara and the team are doing a great job with podcasts that they put out. And I try to follow the UK as well. China and Asia always remains elusive. I'm always looking for a good resource to know what's going on there. And so I continue with that. I try to look more at the advisories. So the KPMGs, the PwCs, the McKinseys, what are they saying about what's coming out of China? Because it's kind of tough to navigate through that.
Good point. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, some great recommendations there. That's great, and I share some of them for sure. Yeah. And very lastly, how, if people wanted to reach out to you, is LinkedIn the best way to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Graham, LinkedIn, and you're about to see an update there. LinkedIn, Marcella Larsen, look for me there. I'm going to reboot and give Twitter a try. I don't know what your views are on Twitter, but
I tried to reboot about 5 months ago. I would still say I'm stumbling a little bit.
Okay. Well, with Jack Dorsey kind of stepping down, I've got high hopes, and I think I need to get back into that platform. Yeah. So I've just set up RTL remarks, so retail remarks, so that I can put more snippets out there that are more timely.
Great.
We see a lot of change. And I'll be publishing deeper blog posts. I was also going to add, in addition to the podcast, I've really been trying to go deeper too. So I'm looking forward to your book, but one that I've just finished is Arriving Today. Mm-hmm. And if you want to get deep into supply chain, it does a great job of explaining from factory into our hands, that journey along the way, and why we're experiencing shock and changes. But it's incredibly fascinating, even down to the innovation with the ropes that they were using to tie up these cargo ships. And with the innovation in the rope technology,
really? Right.
How that drove more commoditization for globalization. A great book, and it helps us understand why we're experiencing some of the shocks today. But I'm trying to read more deeper insights rather than so much of the surface stuff to kind of think through the deeper impact in what lays out.
And so that was called Arriving Today?
Arriving Today.
Arriving Today. Okay, I will definitely hunt that out. That sounds really interesting. Well, fantastic. Marcella, thank you very much for giving us your time on the webcast. It's been a real joy, and you've peppered the conversation with lots of insights and lots of examples, and great to have you along.
Well, thank you, Graham. Hopefully we can revisit the conversation maybe in 6 months and see where we're at, and I'll be able to share more insights from the new customers and the new technologies.
And good luck with the Salesforce gig. Sounds super exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you.